Good evening. Welcome to WashU Olin's Leadership Perspectives event, the other F word, learning from failure. My name is Leslie Ramey, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the Olin Women in Business organization here on campus. Olin Women in Business supports female students by offering career, recruiting, educational, and networking opportunities. We are so glad to be here with you tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to a few people we have with us this evening. First, please allow me to introduce Nicole Schumer with WashU Olin's Graduate Programs Office. Please be sure to connect with Nicole if you have questions or would like more information about any of our graduate degree programs here at Olin. We also have with us tonight representatives from Olin's Alumni and Development Office. If you or your company is interested in finding opportunities to engage with Olin, please be sure to speak with Sean Martin, Larry Harrison, Casey Lucas, Kent Dunson. And last but definitely not least, we have Dorothy Kittner joining us from Olin's Weston Career Center's Office of Corporate Relations. If you or your company would be interested in meeting our students, please introduce yourself to Dorothy. Again, welcome and thank you for being here. Tonight's event is just one in a series of many featuring informative and timely speakers here at WashU Olin, where we meet you at the gateway of ideas, innovation, and inspiration. Now, to kick off our evening, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dedric Carter, Vice Chancellor for Operations and Tech Transfer and Professor of Engineering Practice here at WashU. Dedric is the Senior Executive Officer for many key operations functions at WashU, including dining and food services, campus card services, parking and transportation, summer programs and conferences, procurement and resource management, and environmental health and safety. He has an extensive background in the entrepreneurial space, teaching courses in systems applications with an emphasis on the entrepreneurial process and new venture creation. He's currently the Vice Chair of Venture Cafe St. Louis and a board observer for the Cortex Innovation Community. Previously, Dedric was the Senior Executive Officer for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, with oversight for the Office of Technology Management, the Center for Research Innovation, and the Scandalaris Center for Entrepreneurial Studies at WashU. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from MIT and a PhD from Nova Southeastern University. Please welcome Dedric Carter.
Thank you very much. You know, tonight we have a topic that I think is a really important one. I often tell the students that I want to teach them one of the most insidious words they've ever heard. It's a four-letter word. Ready? Fail. All right? The other F word. And today we get a chance to talk about failure and recovery, and we've got a wonderful cast of people here to help us have that discussion. So I'm going to ask each of the folks to my left here if they would take about a minute just to sort of introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, my name is Lisa Hu. I'm the founder of Lux and Nyx. At Lux and Nyx, we design functional luxury handbags for the women on the go who's out to make a difference in the world. And we've been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, Marie Claire, and we were selected to be the swag bag at the Screen Actor Guild Award this year.
Hey, good evening. Mark Pydynowski. I'm an entrepreneur, a product guy who loves user experience. I am an aspiring yet regularly failing good steward of anything that I touch. I have seen both startup and corporate life, startup as a co-founder as well as eighth employee. I currently live in Austin. I have 2 young kiddos and a wonderful wife. And I just quit my corporate job to return back to the startup world and start another company from scratch.
That deserves some applause, right? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Doug Villhard. I'm the new professor of practice and entrepreneurship here at WashU. I noticed that the University of Texas just got a new professor of practice, Matthew McConaughey.
You look just like him.
And you guys got
Absolutely.
this. Yeah, that's right.
You see the resemblance.
Thank you very much.
I think you look better.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
We're keeping Austin weird.
But it's my pleasure to be here. I really think of myself as a professor in practice. I'm still a CEO of the technology company that I run here in St. Louis, and I got my MBA here as well. So excited to be back in this role and to continue my relationship with the university. Looking forward to the topic tonight. I knew it was about failure. I didn't know it was also about recovery. So thank goodness. I'm excited about that.
If we just left you on fail, that would be a problem. So Doug has reminded us that prepositions matter, in versus out. So Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
Absolutely.
Thomas Alva Edison said, many of life's failures are really people who did not realize how close they were to succeeding before they gave up. It's a really interesting perspective on failure. I wonder if you might share with us just a couple of moments that were clear failure moments for you that you had in developing your product for Lux and Nyx.
Sure. So I set the tone up to tell you guys about the success, just so that you guys can understand where I came from. So I have a corporate finance background. I have my CPA, MBA. I always thought I was going to be a CFO at a big public corporation. And here I am today. I have a fashion company. I started off as a one-woman show. And how this whole thing started was not even, I had no fashion design background. I didn't take one class in fashion design. And at the time, the typical entrepreneurial story, you see a need, and at the time it was my own need. And I started off every single day, super busy, get up in the morning, work out, head straight to work. I was the director of finance at a local company called Aegeon. Right afterwards, I would go to my MBA evening class here, and then I would travel for work and leisure, and I was just constantly finding myself trying to catch up. There's so much to do, and I was carrying a million different bags. I had a plastic bag for my shoes, an extra bag for my gym clothes, and then my laptop, and all these different things, my wallet, everything. And I was just like, damn it, why can't I find one bag that would be able to fit all these different needs and also look professional enough for me to be able to walk into a boardroom instead of stumbling in with my plastic bag full of my shoes. So I was like, okay, well, I gotta do this. Well, most people, after my MBA class, of course, all of a sudden I had all this free time on my hands. I was done with my PMBA. And I was like, I'll pick up a hobby. I'll learn how to sew and make this bag myself. I quickly learned that I was not good at sewing. I fired myself from that position. And then, I was like, okay, I'll find a seamstress to help me. Okay, great, a seamstress, done. And then, but the thing is, she was like, but I can't actually make this bag for you because it requires a lot more technical skills, the right machinery, blah, 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 blah. Fine, I'll go look for a bag maker, looked in St. Louis area. Once again, the bag maker told me, I can't make this. Okay, that's odd. Well, the complexity that goes into a functional bag is in a very beautiful designed form is actually technically hard to do. And so most of the time, if you see something that's made, you see more of an empty tote form. And so, then fast forward, I went to New York. I looked, did not find someone there. I found a sample room. They told me it's going to take 6 months to make that. So I was like, okay, well, now that I'm counting back, I did 20 different prototypes. So 6 months each would have taken me how long? A really long time. So I looked online, and during this whole entire process, I got to a point where, I was just so fascinated by the process of hey, I'm not, we're WashU MBAs, we don't give up on things easily. So I was like, I'm gonna make this happen. Fast forward, I realized the only way to make this happen is if I left my corporate job and did this full time and traveled overseas to find a manufacturer. And at that time, I had to make a tough decision. Do I do this? Do I not? I was a director of finance with a seemingly very successful job. And I was like, you know what? I'll do it. Life is short. So I did. I traveled overseas, and I had a handful of manufacturers that I wanted to go visit. I went to Hong Kong, went to this trade fair. And I wanted to look for more sourcing. And during this time, I made a friend who was from my family's hometown way back in China, mainland China. And so he was like, go look at your manufacturers, but, I also have a source, and, you can follow us and, watch us go through the markets and watch us go through our manufacturing process and everything like that. So that's what I did. I followed them for 3 weeks straight. Every single day, I went to the material market, I went to the hardware market, I went to the manufacturing, I went to their storefront. I did everything with them day in and day out. I ate dinner, lunch, breakfast with them, everything. The thing is, I wasn't looking at them to be the manufacturer during that process. And I had a handful that I thought I wanted. I went there, and before I left, to my disappointment, none of them were the right manufacturer. It is beyond harder than anything I ever imagined. I thought I could sew and make it myself. I thought I could find someone else to make it in the US. I thought I could find someone easily overseas, and none of that was possible. In fact, I got one more sample before I left, the day before I left, and I looked at it, and I literally almost fell apart because I was like, this is not it. This is not what I came here to make. And at that point, my friend, his name is Anson, he was like, why don't you give us a try? He has a small batch manufacturer that makes high-end handbags. They don't do function. But because I built this relationship with them, because they saw how eager I was to learn about this process, he was willing to make it work. And fast forward to today, it's been, I launched the brand last May 2018. It's been a year and a half, and I'm still working with them. So I guess back to your point. At any given point during that process, should I have said, I'm going to give up? I could have easily said, I'm going to give up at any of those no's. I would not be here today. Lux and Nyx would not exist today. All those accolades I told you earlier, absolutely none of them would exist. And so I guess that's kind of my point.
So I guess the follow-up I'll ask you, first, the manufacturer, is that abroad or here?
It's abroad.
Abroad. So what pushed you to persist?
To persist.
So was it the fear of, you'd already given up your job now, or is this really, I think I have something here?
It went a little bit above that. Mm-hmm. It was almost like the clarity of what I wanted in life. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I don't quite share very often in public, and it's a very personal matter, is at the time, right before I started this company, I was going through a lot in my personal life. I actually was going through a separation, and I was also wondering if being a director of finance, if that was what my purpose was. So all those culminated to me thinking, what's my higher purpose? What's going to drive me? So the funny thing about this is I found my ultimate voice, mm-hmm. let's say, which is, what did I want to do? I knew I wanted to make an impact, and hence the mission statement, the woman that wants to make an impact. Mm-hmm. I decided education was very important to me. Double masters, who does that? And so I was at a point where I was like, okay, well, I want to build schools. So that's part of our mission. We build schools. And I came to the realization, well, I'm not good at volunteering, but I'm great at business stuff. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trained to do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to create a business that's a conduit for social impact, for-profit social impact.
So finding your voice helped you to persist through those three. That's pretty great.
Finding my voice.
And did anyone else have kind of a failure moment, an Thomas Alva Edison-esque moment you'd like to share? Mark, you look like you have this burning moment in you.
From a pure failure moment, let's say like epic fails. So probably two that were probably the most epic. So I started a company with another WashU alum. We were identifying and tracking cattle for food safety. And about 2 years into it, cattle wasn't working, subprime mortgage crisis was happening, and we were about to raise our first round of institutional capital, and it basically fell through. And we didn't have the cash to really keep on going, and with all part-times and contractors and everybody else, we were about 30 people. And we had to go from 30 people back down to 2 overnight. And that was a pretty epic fail. And then the other one, that same company about 3 years later, after we pivoted from cattle to mice, this was now 2012, my co-founder and I got fired. We were thrown out of the company by our board, which was really one VC at that time. And it was because we had essentially not performed. The product wasn't working in the field. We had two main investors. One of them decided they weren't going to continue funding the company. And we were out. We were very publicly out. And so those are probably the two most public and epic fails.
Mm-hmm. There's the very iconic Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler, that says you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And in those moments, so for some, it's kind of public, you're out, that's a walk away.
Yep.
But how do you know in these other moments that it's a time to walk away as opposed to persisting and realizing that you might get beyond those 3 strikes and still do all right?
Sure. So let's come back to that 2008 situation. We were about 2 years into cattle. Cattle just wasn't working well. We had just gone from 30 people back down to 2. The company was insolvent by probably a factor of 3. We had a lot of people telling us, just fold it, walk away, it's not going to work. You have the subprime mortgage crisis and everything else. And I remember one of our closest advisors, now a very good friend of mine, who is also a WashU alum, he said to me, if you're not dead, you're alive. And, it's something that I thought about every single day, multiple times a day, and that's what I hung on to. And throughout this period where I was really just fighting off creditors because we owed people a lot of money. And it was comical at one point where I actually had payment plans where we owed somebody over $100,000 and we were paying them $100 a month on a payment plan. That's how we were negotiating. But at that time, we received a phone call from the Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine. And the Jackson Laboratory is the world's leading breeder of genetically modified mice. And they said, we see what you're doing in the cattle world. We are having a very difficult time identifying and tracking mice. Would you be willing to do a feasibility study with us to see if you can transfer your technology from cattle to mice? And they didn't know that we were doing nothing at the time, just basically on life support. And so I kind of fell off my chair and said, yes, we'll be there in 2 weeks because we're really busy. And we went to Bar Harbor and we realized that yes, we can do it. The technology will be different. We understood the requirements. And we knew that we really needed to explore mice. But we were cattle. It was all things cattle. We raised money on capital. Angel money, corporate money. We'd only been thinking about cattle. Everything was on cattle. So do we hold cattle? Do we fold cattle? What do we do with mice? And we looked at it and we said, okay, let's look at the market growth rates. Cattle stagnant, mice growing. Let's look at the economics. Margins, cattle, razor thin. Mice drug development, very large. Let's look at the early adopters' eagerness to use a new technology. Cattle, no way, not unless my friends have used it for 6 months, and even then I want a 1-year free trial. The mouse world, very eager to adopt new technology. Now let's look at performance requirements. So cattle world, very difficult. You're outdoors, you're indoors, you have temperature changes, you have metal glass water everywhere. Mouse world, you're inside this little sterile environment with simpler requirements and controlled temperature. So we looked at it gosh, everything says that mice will give us a higher probability of actually building a successful company, which really was, we looked at 2 things. Considering, remember, this is subprime mortgage crisis, 2008. We thought that with mice, it would require less capital and less time to get to our first revenues. And with all of that, we looked at it and said, we are going to fold them on cattle, and we are going to walk, maybe even run, towards mice.
I love it.
But we weren't willing to walk away or to fold them on the company. That's what we were not willing to do. We still knew that there was something there. We felt the obligation and the responsibility to the shareholders, the employees, to anybody and everybody who supported us along the way. So we wouldn't do that to the company, but we would do it to the market.
How did you know there was something there?
I think, one, we were naive.
So you thought you knew there was something there?
Yeah, we thought we knew there was something there. Which sometimes is maybe all you need.
That's enough, yeah.
Right? It's just like the blind confidence. 2, we spent enough time talking to different companies that were in the preclinical research world to know that this really was a big problem. And once we understood the requirements for what they really needed us to build, it was much simpler and easier than what we were trying to do for cattle. And we knew that we just knew that we could figure it out. And we eventually did. So I guess there was the naivete and a little bit of research and the validation. Mm-hmm. And also it was maybe easier to compare it to cattle, which was 1,000 times harder.
I love it. So I have to say, when Mark was talking about this, so if you're following along at home, we've got at least two gyms. The first is sort of find your higher purpose in your inner voice, and that will help to propel you through at least the 3 strikes to get to that home run. And the other is if you're not dead, you're alive. Unless you're in a Monty Python skit, at which point you could be nearly dead, but but that could still get you to the next place.
Yeah.
So Doug, we often hear that failure is feedback. This opportunity to mine those sort of less than perfect moments, to find things that really are these life lessons, even in the professorial sense, in or of, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that? I mean, can you talk about some of your moments where, when you look back on them in your mind, it gave you insight into the next venture, the next opportunity, the next path or direction to follow?
Yeah. Well, so I guess I've been fortunate that my failures haven't killed me or anybody else.
You're still alive, right?
Thus, they became learning opportunities. Just as the internet was getting going in late 1998 or so, we had our first startup here in St. Louis, and that was pretty exciting. I don't even know if we called them startups then. I'm not exactly sure, but we were excited. And that company was in the high school sports space. It's a company called Sports Huddle, trying to make a national website for high school sports, if you will. And we raised $7 million here in St. Louis and in Silicon Valley. And we very quickly went from 0 to 100 employees. And it was a fantastic ride as a 25-year-old or so to do this. And then that company, Sports Huddle, today it's called Max Preps. It's the #1 high school sports site in the world, and sold to CBS for $25 million. That was my first startup. Except for the period right in the middle where we ran out of money, went bankrupt, fired all 100 employees, sold the assets of the company to some other guy who renamed it and sold it to CBS for $25 million.
This is choose your own adventure, kind of, right?
I'm trying to remember when I got this job at WashU, which story I told. But here's the thing, though. So why did we run out of money? Well, this was during the startup boom, and we were encouraged to build the biggest audience possible and spent no time on revenue at all. And that was the big lesson for me in the movie Gone with the Wind. I think at the end she says, "I'll never go hungry again." That was our lesson. I'll never be part of a company again that's not focused on revenue from the beginning. So that was the biggest lesson from that one. And then I'll tell you one more brief one. I started my career at Disney.
Before you go to that, I got to ask you a question about the first, and that is, so high school sports. How did you know that there was some there?
Yeah. Oh, I always know.
And then how did you? Oh, you always know.
I always know. Now you know what it was. So the younger people might not get this, but others, well, if you were here when the internet started, there NBA.com basketball came out, and there was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I love Shaquille O'Neal, and you're on the website, and you see Shaquille O'Neal's name, and you can click on it and see all of his stats. Now this is mind-blowing, because before that, you're just in the newspaper looking at stuff, and there's no concept of that. And we're talking about it, and we said, the only thing cooler would be if I could click on myself or my kid and see all of their stats. And that's when we thought, boy, we're on to something. There's 20,000 high schools, millions of high school athletes. There's a much bigger audience and a better technology. They're just never going to, well, for many reasons, they're never going to put Doug Villhard stats anywhere. But they can on the internet. There's enough room. So that was our premise for that business. But I didn't really understand how revenue works, or expenses, or profit. But I knew it was a winner.
So there's got to be a little naivete in there always, right?
Always, yeah. And just one more quick story. At Disney, they let me at 22, this is in 1995, right when the internet came out, I got to do the Make Your Own Homepage exhibit at Epcot Center. The internet was so novel that you could come in and make a homepage, and that was amazing. And it was a computer with a keyboard and mouse and monitor, and it took your picture in 1995, and you would type in your stuff. And if you could remember somebody's email, you could type in the email and send it. And we tested the heck out of that. And I've never been more proud of a piece of software that I've written in my life, and I've done a lot. And we tested, and it was beautiful. And we put it out there in the park, and I just watching kids use it, such joy. The first two teenagers that walked up to it, one of them grabbed the mouse and ripped it out and took it, and the other one grabbed the keyboard and ripped it out and took it. So that was a fascinating moment for us, and that was one of the first times that I'd learned to really empathize, if you will, with the customer. And really think about them, and think about a teenager on a hot day, bored, in the middle of Epcot Center. So most failures have the big lesson. The trick is, did you learn from it? Did you make that mistake over and over, over and over again? So that's what we try. That's what we teach here. You should make those mistakes, but what did you learn from it, and what can you do differently?
So that hot day in Epcot, watching your stuff get torn, how did that lead to the next thing? What lesson did you take into that next venture?
Well, first of all, it was fun to fix that problem. We came up with a trackball that was screwed down, and we came up with the keyboard that was screwed down. And then a kid came up to our application and he hit Control-Alt-Delete, and then he got to the hard drive and he right-clicked and he deleted every file on the. So get the 1995. So this is true. So we got some software from NASA. Fascinating software. All it did was hitting Control-Alt-Delete didn't do anything. That was a lot of money spent to do that. But I use that example a lot when I'm teaching. I use that example a lot with my employees. Sometimes you have to step back for a second. You step back for a second and think of the full environment and in which you're in, and what you can learn from that, and what you can think about that. But you know what? We fixed all those problems in a couple of days, and it was a very successful exhibit after that. But I've learned a lot from that. That I used throughout my career.
So we've been talking a lot about the other F word, failure, but maybe sometimes the best thing to sort of understand failure is to help define success. And we could look to Webster and come up with this really articulate, interesting definition of success. But I want to look to the wisdom of the panel here and say, how do you, toss-up question here, how do you define success? And what does that mean for you? What is success in you? Do you think you need to spend time on this early on at the beginning of a venture? Or do you kind of think you figure out success as you go along? What is success?
Should I start?
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier, finding that vision, finding what you're passionate about. But really, a lot of it is still data-backed, KPI-backed. You have a long-term vision that that's kind of your North Star that you go after. But along the way, you set up goals, targets. When I started doing this, I had targets. I thought I was going to create prototypes within the first 2 months and be done with it. Nope, took like 6 months, 7 months for my first prototype. 20 prototypes later, it went a lot faster after that. But the key to that was setting targets. you may fail and not meet that target, you may exceed that target, but knowing what you're going after and being able to anchor that towards your North Star to know what path you're going towards, that's key.
So success for you is sort of setting those targets and figuring out how to approach them.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Other success definitions.
So I'll tell you the ones that I'm using right now. So I mentioned that I just left to go start another company from scratch. The company's in the job search space. Our mission is to change job search for good. Now, I know that any really long run success metrics for startups usually has something to do with an exit. Frankly, I don't really care about the exit because I know that one, companies are typically bought, not sold. Like number one. And number two, there's so many things that we have to figure out and get right before we even get there. So for me, the two things that I care about right now in terms of success metrics are one, are we building something that people want? And two, are they going to pay for it? And that is all I care about right now. I need to first hit those two things. Now, if you want to say like really long run, like what might that be? Well, I think about two other metrics for like the very long run. One is if our mission is to change job search for good, what does that look like? Well, it can look like a lot of the things. But one of the things that I want to figure out how to do is to prove that we can help people find more meaningful work. So it's either more meaning in their existing work or find a job that gives them more meaning. And then number two is $100 million in revenue. Much easier, bright line, but that is the other one. So those are the two that I balance. So I have the ones that are very much the short run, which I really care about, and the other ones, they're in the back of the mind that maybe I'll think about every once in a while, but I don't really pay attention to those.
So near field, far field definitions.
Yeah.
Mine's just very simple. I've always, for me, success is I know it's going to work, and it works.
So if it works and you did know it was going to work,
Luck.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
I have the inverse of that too. I guess failure.
Yeah.
I know it's going to work, just hasn't yet. And I think I'm wired with a high risk tolerance, and that's how I think of things.
So years ago, I was actually with a friend of mine. We were in college. We were crossing the border to Canada, and a customs agent asked us if we had anything in the car, and we said no. And my friend looked at me and said, "But how would you know?" And that led us to a really interesting interaction with this custom agent, right? And so I have to turn. It was a very interesting interaction. There were seats out and all sorts of things. So
The dogs.
How do you know? For your definition of success, how do you know?
Well, let's just go back to the high school one for a second. I knew that it would appeal to me, and I knew that it would appeal to my parents, and I knew that it would appeal to the eventual me who would one day have a high school athlete. And I know that people like their kids more than they like Shaquille O'Neal. And there's a lot more kids than Shaquille O'Neal. And that was about it. That was about it. My wife's out there. When I just quit my job, I went and did that. But that was it.
There sounds like there's some faith in there as well, right? This is good. This is great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess, how did you know? I'm going to put the same question to you about Lux and Nyx.
How do I know that it works?
Or how did you know that this is it? And you're still sort of figuring that out, I think. But
Because every time I came out with a new product, people bought it. So when you have validation like that, it's, I knew it was a problem for me. And, I did do research as well in terms of, there's 50% of females, in the population, 56% on college campuses, 20% in corporate management. But the thing is that 20% is growing at, I think McKinsey said it was like 13% year over year. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm not alone. And, I work out in the morning. And in the beginning, I was probably the only person that was kind of working out at 5:30 a.m. And then I started noticing more and more of them coming to the gym and whatnot. And I was like, oh, wow, like people really have this on-the-go lifestyle, and I need to embrace this. And that was part of the thinking process. And once I launched it with a Kickstarter, and I launched it, and I was like, oh, people bought it. Oh, great! I'll continue doing this. And it's not without a lot of trial and error. It's not without me testing and making sure, I literally did so many different events myself last year. Like standing, like I was at, people here probably, Missouri Athletic Club. I propped up, made a whole stand, and just stood there and talked to people, told people about the story. I sold bags. I was like, oh my God, I'm onto something. People are buying from me. So, so really it's the external validation that, hey, like I wasn't alone. I'm onto something. There are more and more women that are on the go, juggling so much every single day and carrying so much workload on their shoulders. And honestly, they just need an authentic brand to speak for them. And so, I get thank you notes from people, which is pretty amazing. It feels really good. But those are the things: external validation,
an authentic brand, and external validation. I love
Correct.
it.
Yeah.
So, Mark, you're a couple months into the new thing.
Yep.
And you start out by saying, I got a couple hypotheses and I'm testing those.
Yep.
So how did you come about those hypotheses? Did they strike a stroke of genius in the middle of the night, or?
That's the story that everybody would like to believe. Just like there's that chart, right, of what people think success looks like, the straight line, and then what it actually looks like, right, the messy one. It came from, even when I was coming out of WashU, I loved the job search process. I interviewed with every company that I could just because it was this fun challenge for me. When I was hiring people, I loved doing it because it was just interesting, the art and the science aspect of finding out like what they really could do and what they couldn't do. And then I also had, growing up, my dad had a job that he didn't like the majority of our childhood. And we never had the financial means for him to just quit and go find something that gave him more meaning. And that always bothered me because I knew for a long time he was pretty unhappy. And then even at WashU, my junior year, I lived with 6 guys who were on the baseball team. And of the 6 of us, the one who was by far the smartest, which was not me, and the only one for whom I would actually want my sister to date, had a very difficult time with his job search because he wasn't good at telling his story and really selling himself. And then I had seen many of my friends, and even myself once, join companies and find out that the story they were told or sold as a candidate was very different from what life actually looked like as an employee. And with all of those things, in addition to just my general just kind of interest and love for, and just passion for like kind of just being curious more than anything else, I knew that it was a space that I wanted to spend some time in. And so these hypotheses, some of them, there's probably a list of like really about 20, 25. I've been just writing them down over the past probably 3 or 4 years. And I'm now at probably about 60, 65 user interviews over the past couple months where I've been able to kind of winnow it down to these top 2, which I'm now going to go start testing.
So it's kind of the aggregate. It's sort of taking a bunch of time to collect them, a lot of different experiences. There's this movie from the late 90s, Meet Joe Black, some of you may remember, where I think it was Brad Pitt who played Death. Mm-hmm. And there's a place where Death is trying to understand human emotions. And someone says, well, I love her. And he says, well, what does that mean, love? He says, well, she knows the worst thing. The answer is, she knows the worst thing about me and it doesn't matter. And Brad Pitt said, well, what's the worst thing about you? Well, no, it's not. It's the aggregate worst thing. It's I do this, I don't do that. So it's the sum of all these things that is that definition. And what I'm hearing is kind of from your definition of how do you know, it's not that it's this one thing. It was a couple bits and pieces I knew that gave me the aggregate I know. And it wasn't just the 2, it was a summation of 66 or whatever that number was that got you to what you know. Mm. Yeah. We've had a chance to talk a lot up here about questions. I've had a chance to answer some questions, ask some questions. I'll look to you. All right. So she wants to demonstrate the product.
Yes. Thank you for that question. So I guess I should not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. So this is one of our latest products. It looks like a sleek, classy backpack. But in fact, it has a lot of function, and it's kind of badass, like the women that carry our stuff. This front completely comes off. I heard some gasps, but this is so, yeah, it's mind-blowing. This is such a small thing, but you know, people need this because when you get to that next location, you don't want to carry the whole thing. You just want to carry a clutch. And this is actually a belt bag, a crossbody, a wristlet. So you have this. And this is, I don't have shoes for a demonstration today. I probably should have brought them. But this actually goes all, yeah, those would probably fit. This actually goes all the way in on both sides. So this fits shoes, your tennis shoes, your heels, they go on the side. And then, here, I'll just, for the sake of demonstrating. No, it's actually pretty easy.
It's
the one time I say it's easy, it's going to be difficult, right? So in the back, you have, of course, your luggage strap. You absolutely have to have that if you travel a lot. And then on the bottom, umbrella strap. Because you never know when you're caught when it's raining and you need an umbrella, and this whole bag is weather resistant, so you can put the umbrella underneath here too. And there's a laptop compartment, as you would expect, and then also a discreet water bottle holder. So this bag is kind of a life bag if you're traveling. So kind of thank you for the question. This one's $355. Good question as well.
Other questions? Yes.
St. Louis is developing a reputation as an incubator. Did you use any of those resources? Would you have used any of those resources if they were available to you?
How did you tie into the ecosystem here?
Absolutely. I am, a corporate finance person, and so I'm actually part of the St. Louis Fashion Fund, which has validated me as a fashion designer. It's pretty cool. And so I also went to Venture Cafe, big fan. I also co-worked at T-Rex, and so it's so incredibly supportive. I've traveled, to San Francisco. I've gone to New York. I've gone to Chicago and talked to so many different people. And most other cities, people, if you message them, most of the time they're like, no, I'm too busy, or okay, I will talk to you, but you're gonna have to drive 2 hours on this day that I know you're not gonna make it because it was kind of a facetious type of welcome. But in St. Louis, if you reach out to somebody, almost 10 out of 10 will come back and say, yeah, sure, let's do coffee. And that's just so incredible, and I'm so grateful for that.
So we have resources in a very approachable market. Other questions back here?
One thing you hear in entrepreneurship is that mentors are very important. I guess, do you agree with that? And Mark touched on this question, I know. How did they help you get through the failures, or did they?
So I had two very critical mentors who are still friends today, one of whom I had a 2.5-hour lunch with today. And it's funny because we started with this giant advisory board of like 20 people, and there were two that were probably by far the most helpful and effective. And it was funny too because the only difference between these two gentlemen is about 50 years in age. Otherwise, they're kind of the same person. But they were people who'd been through it before. Right? One of them was just, I think, about 7 or 8 years older than me. He was running his own company for which he had raised capital. It was a tech company, so he'd basically been through everything before. The other individual had bought a company, grew it, sold it, had been in business, and has just been around the block for so many years that I could go to these guys and I knew that about 99% of the time, whatever they told me to do was correct, even if I didn't like it, or if I didn't follow it, I'd find out later that it was correct. But also I knew that they had my best interest at heart, and it was almost never at their expense with the exception of maybe their time. And they had been through it. It was easy for me to take the same question, ask it to say 10 advisors, and there were these two who would always stand out. And I knew that they actually had an analysis and a recommendation that was far different and superior than everybody else. And it turned out to be correct.
I just have one comment. I have two mentors here, right here. One of which asked me the question to show the bag.
That's a mentor, right?
That's a mentor. But Donna, in fact, was, when I didn't even know where to start, I started with SCORE locally. And if you guys don't know what that is, it's wonderful. If you don't know where to start, go find someone there. So at the time, I was like, Donna, what do I do? And that she was actually the first one that was like, just learn how to sew and create a prototype. Of course, you guys know the result from that. But along the way, every single time I had an issue, whether I asked Ron, Donna, or my other mentors, like mentors are so immensely helpful. You have no idea. They're so much more experienced. And when you ask someone nicely and they see that you're completely determined, they will get behind you. One of my other mentors, who isn't here today, but he's amazing. He owns a local large private label company, and there were times when I wasn't sure, and I called him, and he was like, "I've been there. I've cried in the corner. I've ate ramen for late night dinners, and I've been there, and I've gotten through it, and so can you." It's not just good advice, but also just motivation, and it'll get you through some of the tough times.
Ramen is the breakfast of champions.
It's good.
Doug, do you want to?
Well, I just, if you don't mind, I'd like to combine both those questions just for a second. There's a special thing about St. Louis, especially in the entrepreneurial community. Folks are willing to help each other and take meetings with each other and explore best practices with each other. And it's easy for me to say, but one of the epicenter of it, I've always found to be WashU. Now I know I'm here today, and can you believe me on that? But I kind of forgot to say something earlier, which is after the sports huddle situation, I don't know. After that company, we started. Experience. We started another one that is worth significantly more than Sports Huddle ever was, and we found that success in St. Louis, and we found it largely. Here we go again. You weren't going to believe me. We found it largely, and remember, I didn't work here then, by hiring WashU students, and a lot of them out of Cliff Holtkamp's program, who's my predecessor. And I know that must seem self-serving, but that is why I came. And what happened was, the young people were so smart at how to grow my business that our real key to success was I couldn't talk to them anymore. Another thing you probably won't believe, but so I went back and got my MBA here, and that helped tremendously because with me out of the company, it allowed them to flourish and to take us to where we are today. But those weren't there initially. But now there's young people coming out who are thinking entrepreneurially. There's co-working spaces here. We had to bribe different landlords as we grew from 1 room to 2 rooms to 3 rooms. That's so much easier now today. And capital at the time really was sort of, if you will, like rich uncle capital, and it wasn't smart capital like it is today with angel groups and with VCs. And this is a special place, St. Louis, to start companies, and the resources here are immense, including the mentors. It's amazing how there's a generation now of us that have been successful that are happy to give right back to, and just that, the whole network of that it's a fascinating time to be in St. Louis.
I have to say I agree. We'll go to the next question, but Doug mentioned it was fun for the folks who he hired as he went back to get his MBA to be out of the company so they could do some things. I don't know if you guys know, but Mentor is from the Odyssey. Odysseus was off doing what he did in the Odyssey, and Telemachus, his son, was back at home. And Mentor was put there to watch over him so that he could grow up to be a good king or queen or whatever you want to say in this time. And to also help him avoid peril, because there were lots of other people. He was not king yet. Odysseus was still out there doing something. But there were lots of other people who wanted to be king, and if you just get this kid out of the way, then the throne is yours. So Mentor has a great deep meaning that I think St. Louis really embraces. I saw a question back here. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa kind of started to touch on this a little bit, but I'd be curious to hear all of your experience about the emotional impact, not only of long-term failure, but short-term, day-to-day failures as well as successes.
Sure, so I can talk on 2 of those. One, in the early days of the startup when we were still based in St. Louis, I ended up choosing the company over a relationship, a 4-year relationship with a woman who we were even talking about getting married. And I consciously made that choice, and it was tough, for sure. Glad I made it today with the wonderful wife that I have. So that was number one. Number two is after my co-founder and I got fired, it was beyond awful. I mean, it was almost 7 years of my life. It was my entire life. It was my identity. Looking back, like people ask about like Bradley now, my 4-year-old is like my first child. And I was like, Bradley actually wasn't really my first child. Like that company was my first child. Like it was my business child. And there was a long period there where like I felt like a complete failure to my friends, my family, because like everybody knew about it. It's all I ever talked about or did. And then 2 years later, the board actually ended up selling that company to a private equity firm in Australia. And so then everybody's next question was, well, did you get your payday? Did you get your big check? And no. Like there was an earnout for a paycheck someday, but I didn't get that either. So you had like all those initial failures, and then you had like the perceived failure later of like not making the payday, which is what everybody expects. But for me in that situation, it was the realization that the money wasn't the value. The value was what I learned. And what I learned was really 4 big things. It was what I learned about myself, what about people, what about business, and about life. And I looked at it as like that was about what I valued more than anything else, and was what I would hang on to and think about for those times when, you know, I went into that dark place of like being a failure, whereas like the company actually didn't fail. It's still around today. People use the product and they love it. Did I fail as a CEO? Yeah, I did. But that's sort of what I would hang on to.
The emotional impact?
Do you want me to continue the story? Okay, sure. So I think we all make mistakes, and you know, sometimes it's what our perception of a mistake is. Sometimes it's a public perception of a mistake. I think going through a personal trauma like a divorce is very personal, and you know, it's also a public failure. So you know, sometimes it's, you know, I learned from that and I embraced it, and you know, Lux and Nyx was born from that. And you know, Lux and Nyx is actually Greek for light and night. It means it's a transition and time changes as well as life changes. So because of my story that I can tell, many women can relate to that, right? Many men can relate to that, the personal failures that come with, you know, your day-to-day work life. But it's about whether you let you down and keep you down, or whether you rise above it. And how do you rise above it? For me, it was finding that purpose of, okay, what's my voice? Like, what's my higher purpose of how do I want to make an impact? And I know, Mark, you kind of touched based on you wanted to change an industry, but that comes from a notion of I want to make an impact too. And so everyone's notion of that is different, and it's just about what's your purpose and how do you find it, and a lot of times how do you learn from failure and rise above it?
So maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more. Any other questions?
Thank you for your great stories. One of the things that Silicon Valley promotes is fail fast, right? If things are not going to work out, you sort of pull that plug. And I know a lot of people have struggled with that idea. You've been working at something, you've been working at it a long time. How do you determine when you sort of pull that plug? And should you, in fact, fail fast? Or, as you all, I think, have demonstrated, sometimes you've got to stick with it for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, so one thing that helps me is I think, except I don't have the talent, I think it would have been a great relief pitcher, because like I have a short-term memory, right? So I can't remember blowing the game yesterday, if you will. So that helps me emotionally. You know what we teach, or what I've teach in terms of failing fast is this, which is, and you guys talked about it too, is I really like revenue. I really like revenue as the validation of whether something is going to work or not. So I really like to try to encourage young people how quickly they can get to the customer, And, you know, it just does not make sense to work on a project for a very long period of time in your basement, not talking to anybody about it, not doing anything about it, or asking friends or others to just nod and say, looks good. You really got to go find customers and go talk to them. So when you do that, you fail faster. You also validate faster. So you know, we definitely teach teach that. But we also teach, though, not so much about fail, but it's about what did you learn? What did you learn? What did you learn? And they will reach a point, if they do it properly, where there might be a market for this, but there's not customers for this. Or there might be customers for this, but they don't have enough money or time to find those customers. So that's generally how we start out. How can you try to validate that there's revenue? You got that when every time you're standing at an event and you're talking about your bag and somebody buys it.
Or doesn't buy it,
Or doesn't buy it. Or didn't buy the early versions of it.
Yeah. So So I completely agree with you. Like sometimes it's like, we fail every single day. I have my Anna's here, Mandy is in the back. We fail literally every single day, maybe every single minute or hour. But it's like, okay, well, that didn't work. What are we gonna do? A few choices, you pick from it. You constantly fail, and you do have a long-term goal, and I would say you have like those key marks that you want to hit. But in between that, it's okay to say, okay, it's trial and error until you get it right. So on the surface, it looks like we're calm, collected. We're never calm and collected, but like inside. But you get to that point because you know where your ultimate destination is, and I think that's so important to know what your target is. In fact, if you don't mind, I have a little shout out to do.
Oh, please, shout out.
So we actually have an event coming up that we're doing a fall launch party, and the theme of it is Own Your Ambition. And in fact, what it is we have an Olympic gold medalist that's speaking, and her concept is she literally failed so many different times before she won her first gold medal, and then she went forth and won 3 more. We also have EY managing partner who used to be my boss. She's going to speak about that as well. So it's all about failing forward, and yes, failing fast and getting back up fast. So that's on October 2nd. If anyone's interested, Mandy's in the back. You guys can sign up for it. My little plug. Thank you.
October 2nd. Mark, do you have anything you want to add?
I think that the failing fast is a little misleading in terms of how people interpret it or how it's been taken from, say, when Eric Ries first wrote about it. I think about it more of coming up with what is the experiment that you need to test in terms of validation for the next step, and to get through that very fast, and for that to be quick and that to be short, and say like, okay, we need to validate this feature, we need to validate this assumption, and let's validate that very quickly and succeed or fail fast very quickly on that part of it. As far as like the whole company and like shutting it down, I think that's where it gets a little misconstrued.
Yeah. So, I love to have these conversations about failure and multiple failures and how it leads to success. Abraham Lincoln had ran in many races, senator, dog catcher, lost them all, but ultimately woke up as the president of the United States. We could talk about that in the context now, but anyway, it was a great success. And I think when asked why he continued to subject himself to this, he said, "I will study and get ready, and perhaps my chance will come. I will study and prepare myself. Yeah. Perhaps my chance will come," and it did. So I'm going to look to the panelists and say we're in our close, 30 seconds, hard timing. What did we miss? What is a burning thing that you've been wanting to say on the panel? No one's asked a question, I missed it, but you got now your 30 seconds of fame to give us that last parting. What is it?
So I really thought about your question, like what's failure? And I always told people it's giving up. And I realized something, it's actually not giving up. It's giving up your potential, because we can give up smoking because it's better for our health. But giving up your potential, it's like that whole giving up something because something else. If that something else is a good thing, you gave up right. If that something else is giving up because I'm afraid of being a complete failure in front of other people, or I'm afraid of Lux and Nyx not working out, and what if people don't like the products? That's failure.
Oh, great, thank you. Mark?
I think we've all probably heard one of the famous Aristotle quotes of, to avoid criticism in life, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. And I think that can be applied to failure as well, right? To avoid failure in life, you can do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. But I think the underlying message in there is to stop caring about what other people think of you, And you can't do that completely. But I think if you say, here are the 5 people in my life who I respect, who I trust, who have the ability to put my interests first, even when sometimes it might be at the expense of their interests, these are the people who I care about what they think and what they say. And everybody else, I'm going to ignore it. And I think if we do that, it will be easier to take risks that will allow us to fail and ultimately allow us to succeed in a much bigger way than we ever could have.
And, I think about, obviously it's self-serving, but I want there to be more entrepreneurial thinkers in the world. And I want more people to take risk and put themselves in situations to fail. But if you're not that kind of person, if you're too scared, basically, or worse, you have an idea but you're too scared, I just ask you just like change the word failure to something different. Change it to like, what did I learn? What did I learn? What can I learn? What can I learn? We have all these great resources here at WashU, including the Scandalaris Center, where you can come in and pitch your idea in a very safe environment and get feedback on it. A very safe environment to get feedback on it. And just, I don't know, if there's anybody out there that, like, if you're here because you're afraid, just find a different word for it and see what we can maybe help you do to learn from it. And once you get past that, I can tell you it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah, in addition to another word, you can also think of it as, most people brand failure as the scarlet letter. But if you think about it more as the Purple Heart, you will completely change your perspective on it.
So I, as a sophomore in high school, I stumbled across this definition of success as doing the best you can where you are with what you have. And I add to that as doing the best you can in the allotted time. And so we have tried our best with where we were with what we had, and our allotted time is expired. So I'm going to now thank our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Leslie to take us home.
To thank our panelists for being here with us tonight by presenting them with a parting gift. We can't thank them enough for volunteering their time and effort to make this such a great event. Let's give them another round of applause.